Hey, everybody. Welcome to the very first live episode of Dagish America Presents. We're so happy to have you here. I am your host, Ben Harrell, and like I said, I'm very happy that all of you decided to join us today. All of our episodes that we've done so far, we've always kind of pre-recorded them. They've all been conversational. It's just us kind of having conversations with people in the industry, talking about all of the different topics that we want to discuss. But we wanted to do a little bit of something different today. We wanted to have a live session so we could kind of ask questions on the fly. We had some questions sent in to us from some of the listeners over the last several episodes of season 2. And so we're kind of fielding some of those questions. But if anybody listening has any questions, just feel free to type them into the comment section. Let us know. We'll be happy to answer those questions for you as we go throughout this. This is also our first time hosting this on our YouTube page. So if you haven't been to our YouTube page before, welcome to our YouTube page. Please subscribe to our YouTube page. We have all kinds of information that we host here, all kinds of different training videos, informational videos. All of our podcast episodes also get sent here on every time they're published. They get published directly to our YouTube page as well. So it's also a nice resource for you if you want to listen into our podcast episodes. So I'm going to introduce our guests today. You may recognize the names. Both of these gentlemen have been on podcast episodes in the past. So I wanted to bring them back because they're fantastic. They have a fantastic amount of information to share with us, especially when it comes to phosphine fumigations, which is what season 2 has all been about. So we have Bartek Dranowski, who's the COO of Dagish America, joining us. And then we've also invited Blake Buckner, our business development manager, to join us today. So thanks a lot, gentlemen. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today to help answer some of these questions.
Well, thank you, Ben. The podcasts have been very educational, entertaining as well. And I'm delighted to be a part of this first live broadcast. So hope all the listeners are enjoying it as well, and viewers are enjoying it as well.
Absolutely. I echo those sentiments, Bartek. Appreciate it, Ben. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Yeah, this is a new foray for us. All the podcasts that we've done so far, we've all done just audio. But we wanted to kind of jump out of our comfort zone a little bit, and hopefully it's going to go well. Hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties today. Hopefully it goes well, but we're hoping that we'll be able to do a lot more of these live or at least video-based podcast episodes in the future. So you can kind of put faces to the names, so to speak, for those of you who haven't actually met us in person before. So we did get some questions from our listeners over season 2 about phosphine. We had some really good ones, and it's things that we didn't really necessarily cover in some of the episodes. So, without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into some of these questions, and hopefully Bartek and Blake will be able to answer some of these for us. So the first question that we have up has to do with the different types of phosphine that are on the market. What are some of the differences between bottled or cylinderized phosphine and packaged phosphine or metal phosphides? I don't care who answers first, but let's get into it.
Blake, you want to go first, or would you like for me to go first?
I'm happy to lead. I guess one of the more obvious differences is going to be the speed of application. With a cylinderized or bottled phosphine, you can get to your concentration almost instantaneously, whereas it takes hours to days for that concentration to build up with the other formulations. I think that's probably the most obvious.
Yep, for sure. And I think probably the second biggest difference is going to be any potential for residues. So depending on the commodity or the space that you're treating and how tolerant that area is for residues, if you're treating bulk grain, for example, which is going to undergo further cleaning processes, then a pressed compound like the aluminum phosphide, phostoxin tablets, pellets, fumitoxin tablets, pellets are the fumigant of choice in those applications. And if you're doing a larger volume, magnesium phosphide would be the fumigant of choice, but those do, especially the packaged products, do come with an element of disposal, potential for deactivation, which the bottled phosphine products do not have that challenge.
Yeah, and those are very, very good points. I think another thing that has to be considered too is with cylinderized phosphine, the packaging is reusable. It's not disposable. So when you're done with the cylinders, you have to actually return the empty cylinders or the partially used cylinders in some cases back to the distributor or manufacturer. Whereas with the metal phosphides or packaged phosphine, they come in containers. They can either be recycled, they're aluminum, so they can either be recycled or disposed of or whatever the case is. So there is some extra steps that you have to take in order to make sure that those cylinders get back to the manufacturer or the distributor.
Yeah, of course. Everything comes at a price, and obviously there is a fairly significant price difference in this cylinderized phosphine, gram for gram, if you will, between cylinderized phosphine and pressed compounds and even packaged products. But the offset is the potential for any packaged material or any residues that one may have to contend with post fumigation. So that's that consideration. You brought up a very good point, Ben, about the freight. So even when the fumigation is over, the containers have to be returned.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the disposal, you guys talked about the disposal, and I mean, that's a key element to the metal phosphides. And you don't always have to do disposal. A lot of times you're mixing the pellets and tablets directly into the commodity. If it's raw unprocessed goods, a lot of times you can mix that directly into the commodity. And so disposal's not really an issue. Disposal is going to get taken care of through the normal processing of those raw agricultural commodities, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you do have to collect that stuff back up, especially when you're dealing with fumicels and you're dealing with pre-packs and sometimes with loose pellets and tablets, you have to collect that stuff back up too. And then when you collect it back up, you have to prove that it's been deactivated through some means, whether it's wet deactivation, dry deactivation, because there is spent material that's left over. So you have to figure out some way to make that safe or prove that that's safe for normal disposal. With cylinderized phosphine, you don't have to worry about that. It actually starts out applied as a gas, releases as a gas, and then aerates as a gas. So all of these are excellent points when it comes to this product.
Yeah, I guess another thing, Ben, is that with the application equipment, I wouldn't necessarily call it ease of use, but when you're using cylinderized phosphine, you have to have all the application equipment that goes along with it, the lines and the fittings and scales and things of that nature. So that's a key difference as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely takes very specific application equipment to apply cylinderized phosphine, and that stuff is under a pretty extreme amount of pressure. So it depends on what kind of cylinderized phosphine it is too. There are a couple of different concentrations on the market or types on the market. There's 100% phosphine, where you actually have to have very specialized equipment to blend it with air to make it safe for use during the application process. And then you also have 2%, which the 2% is non-flammable in all proportions with air, but its contents are under a very high amount of pressure. So you have to make sure that the application lines can handle that type of pressure during the application process. I mean, it can be several hundred PSI depending on the temperature of the cylinder that you're dealing with, which again, as long as you're getting the right kind of application equipment, is completely safe. But you have to make sure that you have stuff that's rated for the type of PSI that you may come into contact with when working with this stuff.
Dan, and you bring up a very good point about safety, and let's not forget one other very important aspect of safety, which is the safety of the fumigant when it's inside of the fumigated space. And it's no secret that solid aluminum, magnesium phosphide, and liquid water aren't the best of friends. So if you're applying to a structure which may pose an element of risk or uncertainty as to whether or not that's something that you can eliminate for sure, again, the bottle of phosphine would be a more logical choice, again, at a different price point. So it's good to have multiple tools in your toolbox when just like with any other integrated pest management process, to know what tool is going to suit that fumigation best is very critical in selecting what type of fumigant and what sort of packaging of fumigant that's going to be desired.
Oh yeah, I mean, all of those factors are going to play a part in that decision. Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to another question here that we get. In my experience, as a fumigator, I've been asked this question quite a bit. And the reason why I think this is asked is because the folks who have to do this aren't necessarily always licensed fumigators. but it has to do with aerating rail cars. We all know, or hopefully we all know as fumigators, that we can fumigate with phosphine while it's in transit, as long as it's in a ship or it's in a rail car. You can't do it on public roadways, but as long as it's a rail car or it's a ship hold, you can actually fumigate it while it's being moved from one location to another location. Well, wherever that destination ends up, whoever's responsible for that rail car, they're going to have to aerate that or prove that there's no concentration of phosphine left, or a safe concentration of phosphine left inside that rail car. What does that person who's receiving that rail car that's been fumigated, what are some of the things that they need to know or be prepared for when accepting that rail car that's been fumigated?
Yeah, Ben, I think I can at least kick this off. And it's sort of beaten into the ground, but for good reason. Safety is first and foremost, the first and foremost concern, whether it be the monitoring equipment, which is probably the most important. And it doesn't matter whether it's tubes or electronic. You need to have monitoring equipment to be able to test for levels of phosphine on the other end. And then obviously fall protection is critical as well. Whether it's active or passive, there needs to be some sort of fall protection measures, depending on the type of car, if you have to get on top to open the hatches and stuff like that. But just like everything, you got to follow the label, and it really kind of comes down to two things: who and how. And who is, I don't know if Adam could pull it up, but who is it's specifically outlined in the label, and it's a little bit of I won't call it a loophole. It's actually quite a good benefit that you don't actually have to have a certified applicator on site. I don't know if it's pulled up, but you just need to have a person that has documented training on how to do that. And it's cool that in the label, it actually, like I said, I don't know if Adam has pulled it up, but I can talk to it anyway. It specifically designs that, or I'm sorry, it specifically dictates what that training must entail. So there's no questions on whether the person's properly trained or not. So I think it's in section 12 of the applicator's manual that gives those specific instructions.
Right. And I think you bringing up safety is a really good point. I mean, we have to keep in mind that not only do we have to make sure that whatever commodity is being fumigated is safe for use and is at that 0.3 part per million or under limitation, but we also need to make sure that the person that's aerating or initiating the aeration and completing the aeration on that rail car, that their breathing zone is also under that 0.3 parts per million, or if it's not, that they are aware of it in some capacity so they can wear the proper respiratory protection. So right. I'm really glad that you brought up that safety, because that's something that, and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, fellas, but the people who receive the rail cars, they don't have to be licensed fumigators.
That's correct.
Have to be trained in the ability to aerate the rail cars. So they may not have, everyday experience like a normal fumigator does when it comes to respiratory protection, what they need. So that training and that label is going to be critical to make sure that they know what they're doing when it comes to all of the respiratory protection they may need and what those levels are.
That's right. And Ben, so Blake, you bring up a very good point about the training, and the training is outlined in the applicator's manual. And if I don't think a podcast episode ever went by without at some point somebody saying, read the label is the law. So definitely read the label is the law, and the label outlines everything that needs to be done. Oftentimes the label gets breezed through, and we all of us seem to get complacent, and as changes to the label get implemented, we don't always keep up with it. But one of the things that's most often overlooked in these in-transit fumigations, especially ones that have to do with rail cars, is that there's a very specific requirement that the fumigator or shipper has to provide certain documents to the receiver of that rail car so that they know that it's under fumigation, that they know what product was used, they know the quantity that was used on that product. So it's either something that can be sent ahead of time, or oftentimes you will see that it is something that's attached in a weatherproof envelope on the outside of the rail car that has the particulars as to what to do with it when it shows up, what the fumigant was, as well as the applicator's manual. So going back to the manual, section 22.5 in our applicator's manual for the loose pellets and tablets goes into great detail as to what documents are required.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the documentation that can be attached to the rail car as well. If any of you out there work in some of these facilities and you receive rail cars and you see one that has warning signs or placards for fumigation on the rail car when you've received it, or you see some of that materials, the paperwork attached to a rail car, and there's any question at all whether or not that rail car has been fumigated and whether or not it's been aerated, if you have not been trained in it, please do not try to attempt to do anything at all with that rail car. Go get your supervisor, go get a responsible, whatever party is responsible for that, and let them know so they can confirm whether or not that rail car has been aerated.
Yeah, and if they don't know, call us.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll be happy to help too.
And something to note, going back to the training that Blake had mentioned, that's in section 12 of our applicator's manual. That training has to be conducted by a certified applicator who's certified in that state where the rail car is being received. So that way they are familiar with those particular laws or regulations concerning proper aeration of any fumigated structure. So if anybody's receiving rail cars, make sure that you have someone on your staff or you have members of your staff who have been properly trained per section 12 of the applicator's manual by a certified applicator in that receiving state.
Yes. Yeah, that's another excellent point. You can't just be trained by the previous person who did it if they're not certified to do it. You have to be trained by somebody who is certified in that state. So that's excellent.
There's another thing that's often overlooked is in section 18. There's a different tolerance level for food and feeds and for non-food commodities. That gets overlooked sometimes. The food and feed is 0.1 parts per million, and the non-food commodities is 0.3, so it goes a little extra step further. And there's an important stipulation in that section as well, because this gets confused a lot of times. They put an hour or a time value on the aeration, but they also put an or. It's important to know that even though it says 48 hours, it's not aerated until you reach those levels. Just because it says 48 hours, if it's not below 0.3 or 0.1, then it's not aerated.
Yeah, that's a hard, fast rule. If you don't get it below 0.3 or 0.1, you have to continue the aeration process. And, I've had calls from folks in the past that have called me and said, hey, I've had this rail car aerating for 6 days now, and I'm still getting readings of 1-2 parts per million. Well, you're not done. I mean, you have to get it below the 0.3 or 0.1, depending on what you're working with there, especially when it gets colder. That fumigant phosphine doesn't like to move very well when it's colder outside. So when you get into colder months like it is right now in the U.S., we're in December. A lot of the U.S. is pretty cold these days, this time of year. That phosphine, and depending on the density of the commodity, it may take several days for it to actually aerate out of the rail car. So you need to be prepared for that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the weather conditions.
I think you're freezing up on us, Bartek. one of the side effects to doing a live feed. Go ahead and say that again, Bartek.
I said weather conditions play a lot into it as well. Obviously, wind, humidity, all those. So if you are able to fumigate or aerate a rail car in a day or two once, that doesn't mean that's going to be the standard for every aeration going forward.
That is an absolutely excellent point. You are 100% right about that. If you're aerating on a day where there's high wind, that gas could aerate out of that rail car very fast. And if you're aerating on a hot day where the air's really still and it's really humid, it's probably not going to move very fast. So
Season 3. Season 3, fumigation meteorology.
Yeah. Well, we could spend an entire podcast season just talking about weather and how it affects fumigation. That's for sure.
For sure.
All right. So one of the other things that we run into a lot as far as questions, and we got asked this a lot, and we get asked this a lot, has to do with corrosion when using phosphine. A lot of people want to understand, what are some of the ways that we can actually minimize the chance for corrosion on soft metals and some of the things that can be corroded inside facilities when we're using phosphine.
I can kick this one off, Blake. So obviously, corrosion is a fascinating mystery when it comes to phosphine, because oftentimes there is no direct correlation to the concentration, the length of exposure. We're seeing humidity playing a factor in the development of corrosion. We have studied corrosion for decades, and there's still no clear-cut answers. Here's what we do know is that corrosion is definitely a possibility when using phosphine. We have fumigated structures with electrical panels for years without a single incident. And then you go in and do a one-time fumigation, and every piece of wiring is completely corroded. So there's very little rhyme or reason to it. But we do know that that all three of those, the length of exposure certainly increase the chances of it. The concentration or the parts per million certainly may increase the risk of it. Humidity may increase the risk of it. And oftentimes it's something that may not be visible for days, weeks, or even months later down the road. So the reaction with the phosphine is the catalyst for the reaction, and the effects of it may manifest themselves much later down the road. So basically, the two basic rules of thumb if you want to avoid corrosion is either A, don't fumigate with phosphine in that particular space, or two, if any way possible, remove anything that you're concerned with corrosion. We have studied at length in our test chambers various coatings, various treatments, wax coatings for sprinkler heads, different types of grease coatings. We are looking into a conforming polymer spray that could be used on some electronic equipment, but that's not going to work once the equipment's installed. That's really something that would have to happen at the manufacturing level of the equipment prior to ever being in fumigation. So we worked with a lot of customers that were proactive about it and removed a lot of the unnecessary equipment from the indoors to the outdoors, alarm monitoring equipment, those sorts of sensors that don't necessarily have to be inside to the outside of the structure. One of the things that we've had very poor results with is trying to wrap in plastic or tape up or somehow isolate electrical panels and things like that, because I think most of us are under the understanding that very few things are truly gas tight. So if you wrap a sprinkler head in plastic, essentially what you end up doing is trapping fumigate in there. So then during aeration, that fumigate actually stays in and exposes that particular piece of equipment to even longer periods of phosphine exposure. So that's something that personally I wouldn't recommend. I've never had very good luck with it. So Blake, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I'll say something if you don't mind me cutting you off.
Sure.
All right, because you brought up a really good point about wrapping things in plastic. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I haven't had a lot of success wrapping things in plastic, but I have had some success with kind of doing kind of a reverse, what I always called a reverse tape and seal. So I would actually, if you have like digital palletizers or larger equipment that you need to protect, you can actually cover that in poly, completely encase it, and then you can actually with air pumps, you can actually pump fresh air into that, kind of blow it up like a balloon, and have an ejection point too. So you have to have two lines so you don't blow it up to where it pops. But if you pump fresh air into that area, now the fumigant's still going to get in there, but it's going to get in there in lower concentrations. Now that adds a lot of labor in some cases. So it's not always an ideal situation, but if you have one piece of equipment that you really need to protect and the customer is extremely adamant about using phosphine, you can do it carefully, but I would always suggest anytime you can remove any kind of equipment or anything at all that poses a risk of corrosion, get it out of there. Don't fumigate with it, or don't fumigate with phosphine. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Blake. But while we were talking about that, I wanted to mention that. So
now, Ben, positive pressure is definitely one of the only solutions, if you will. If you have to have this equipment in there and you're still trying to protect it.
Yeah.
All right, Blake, now you're up.
No, mine's actually it's sort of adjacent to the point, but it's still important. And of course, my mind always travels to safety, and this is less about mitigation and more about safety. If you are fumigating in a structure with phosphine, I think that probably the most critical thing to pay attention to, because like Bartek said, the corrosion's sort of like Michael Jordan in his heyday. It's you can't stop it. You can only hope to contain it. But the fact of the matter is, it's going to get to your sprinkler heads. So you need to be doing your checks and doing your due diligence and checking those sprinkler heads because I think that if you're listening to this podcast, you know that phosphine is not best friends with water, and the last thing that you want to happen is to have an issue with your sprinklers. So just make sure that you're keeping up and doing your due diligence on your sprinkler systems if you're going to be fumigating in a structure.
Yeah, I don't know how in the world you managed to get a Michael Jordan reference into phosphine corrosion.
But I do, man.
That was great. Yeah, the only other thing that I'll mention when it comes to phosphine corrosion is something I've seen a lot of fumigators do in the past. Don't forget to take your phone out of your pocket and leave it in your vehicle or in your truck or whatever the case is before you go in and start aerating facilities. I have had fumigators that I've worked with in the past. They'll leave their phone in their pocket. They'll put on their SCBA. They'll be completely safe. They'll go in to initiate aeration. It may not ruin your phone the first time, the second time, the third time, but if you continue to take your phone in there, it has sensitive electronic equipment in it. You're going to turn that phone into a brick eventually. And I don't know about you guys, but phones are pretty expensive to replace these days. And I don't want to replace them because I've corroded it. So as a fumigator, it's always a good idea to take your phone out of your pocket before you go in.
I bricked a couple before I learned my lesson.
Yeah, we probably all have, to be honest with you. There's one guy that was on a fumigation crew with me years ago that I think every summer he ended up bricking a phone and had to replace it. And he always gets super mad. I said, well, you got to remember, so. We only have one more question that we're going to cover today. And this is a topic that's not talked about a lot, but we did get a question about this. And I myself, I don't have a lot of experience with this. Growing up in the Midwest, most of my fumigation experience, especially with phosphine, had to do with grain bin, elevator, commodity fumigations, things like that. So I just don't have a lot of experience with it myself. So I'm hoping that I'll learn a little bit by asking this question too. But burrow fumigations. Metal phosphides are allowed to be used for burrow fumigations. So can we get a little bit of an explanation on what we mean by saying burrow fumigations and kind of a brief explanation on how it's actually done?
Sure, I'll give it a shot, and Blake, you can fill in the gaps. So
it's all you, man.
talk about a very niche fumigation. Run burrows are in the field of fumigation. It's probably one of the narrowest fields, and it seems like it's such a simple fumigation, but it just, as you all know, once you really start digging into anything, the nuances of it are so layered, and there are so many different components to it. So run burrow fumigations are no different. They're intended to treat vertebrate pests, and they're not. And obviously, fumigant paints with a very wide brush. So once you're applying the fumigant to a rodent burrow, is going to kill anything in there. So first and foremost, make sure that the areas that you're applying or intending to apply the fumigant in don't have any protected species in them, because that can be fairly problematic for you, for your company, for your fumigation license, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of a byproduct of it. But first and foremost is, again, back to the label. Read the label, especially if you have been doing these types of fumigations for a long period of time. The label has been updated a number of times with regard to run burrow fumigations because of some safety concerns. There was an incident probably 10 or 12 years ago, a very tragic incident that resulted from a gross misapplication of product in the state of Utah that resulted in some fatalities. And the EPA really took a very close look at how rodent fumigations are done. So if you notice, I believe Adam has our fumitoxin or a phostoxin label pulled up, and if you notice right in the center, there's a great big disclaimer in red that deals with rodent burrow applications. And yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, yep, that's it. So yeah, starting on the front cover, it talks about rodent applications, and then goes section 26 goes into the details of rodent burrow applications. So first and foremost, make sure that the area that you're applying the fumigant in is permissible by law. And the label has some restrictions about 100-foot distances from residential areas, and some restrictions on hospital grounds, nursing home grounds, school grounds, some exceptions for athletic fields. Nonetheless, those are left up to interpretation by the individual states departments of ag. So prior to any rodent burrow application, I really encourage all of you, because there is some ambiguity in how some of these provisions are handled in different states, especially states that are much more sensitive to rodent burrow fumigation. So please consult with your state agencies and make sure that you're doing whatever it is that you're doing is in accordance with their rules and regulations. But the premise of the fumigation is very simple. You apply the aluminum phosphide to the individual burrows, then you cover them up. You bury cover the opening with a burlap sack and some dirt, or some sort of sheeting in dirt, so that the rodents don't come back out when they do detect phosphine. You can introduce the aluminum phosphide directly into the burrows, into the openings, if you know where the openings are. There's also some specialized equipment that allows you to penetrate into the different burrow areas. There are restrictions as to how many, the maximum of how many tablets and pellets are allowed in each burrow. So make sure you don't exceed those minimums. Make sure you placard the area very clearly in accordance with label instructions, so everybody in the area is aware of what's going on. Make sure the property owner is aware of what's going on. And that's all sort of falls back to FMP as well. So in preparation of your fumigation management plan, make sure that all of those areas are addressed, and you're following the label to the T doing these fumigations, especially in areas where you're neighboring the restrictions of where it can and cannot be applied. So I don't know if I'm sure they left a few gaps, but that's sort of the meat and potatoes of the rodent burrow fumigations.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing that you brought up was just the two most important things to me that you brought up were, number one, making sure that you're reading the label and the manual prior to trying to do any burrow fumigation, just because it is such a niche market and because it does have a lot more restrictions than your standard fumigations in most cases. And then the second thing that you brought up that I think is key as well is consultation. If you're not familiar or comfortable doing these, ask for some advice, ask for some help, reach out to your local and state regulatory agencies to get some guidance from them. And you can also call us and get some guidance from us as well. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. We'd much rather, I promise you, we'd much rather have you safe and applying the phosphine correctly to the burrows than trying to hazard guesses or take chances. So you can reach out to us at any time. And I will, you can reach out to us at podcast@dagishamerica.com. You can find us on our website at dagishamerica.com also. So you can reach out to us in those areas. We have a contacts page on our website if you want to talk to any one of us specifically. Our phone numbers on our website, of course. You can find us on all the major social media outlets. I mean, if you just search Dagish America, you're going to find us. I promise. So
that's right.
Speaking of the website, we do have both the specialized placards. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the specialized placards and the application equipment, we offer that as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yep. We sure do.
So Benny, you're exactly right. Feel free to reach out to us for consultation. Not only are the three of us licensed fumigators, but we can see things from a couple of different perspectives. As Dagish America is a product registrant, and we're also a manufacturer. So we have folks on staff that can provide guidance going all the way back to the production of the product. So are there any technical questions, any sort of application questions, any storage questions, any questions related to not just the application of the fumigant? We certainly have those folks available as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a wealth of knowledge that we're ready, willing, and able to share with any and all that need the assistance. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, well, that's the last question that we were going to field today, gentlemen. I want to thank both of you for taking some time out of your day to answer some of these questions that came in through season 2. And that's the end of season 2, actually. So hopefully everybody had learned a lot. Hopefully everybody was entertained. All of our viewers and listeners were entertained by the podcast. We will have another season at kind of late first quarter next year is kind of our tentative plan right now. If anybody has any ideas or suggestions for topics for our podcast that are related to fumigation or pest control in general, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. Again, you can reach us at podcast@dagishamerica.com, or you can reach us at dagishamerica.com. Either of those, either the website or just a direct email to podcast@dagishamerica.com will get to me directly, I promise. And I also wanted to take an opportunity to thank Adam Thompson. I think all of you may have heard his voice pipe in here and there a little bit, and we refer to him. Adam Thompson's our digital media coordinator, and he was kind enough to set all this up for us and help us with the digital portions of today's live stream. So thank you, Adam. I really appreciate your help with that.
Background man.
Yeah, the background man. I like that.
And Ben, if I may, I'd like to thank you for putting the first 2 seasons together. And I really appreciate all of the participants who helped make season 1 and 2 a success. And most importantly, I really appreciate all the viewers. Hopefully you found, and listeners, hopefully you found the podcast interesting, engaging, informative, maybe even a little entertaining. So thank you all so much for being a part of it. And I wish everybody a safe and healthy holiday coming up. And thank you for your attention.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great place to end it. I'll echo Bartek's sentiments, and that's it. Blake, unless you have something else you want to say, we can call it done.
Ditto.
I like that. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate it. Look for season 3, and make sure you go back. If you haven't had an opportunity, make sure you go back and you give seasons 1 and 2 a listen. We think that there's a lot of really good information there from a wide variety of industry experts. So if you haven't had a chance, go back and listen to season 1 and season 2, and look for season 3 at the end of the first quarter of next year. Thanks a lot, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
And if you're listening to this podcast, please, if you're listening to this podcast at your podcast outlet, please check out the YouTube video version of it, as we do go through the manual and some other documents live on screen, so you can check it out and see what's going on there when we're talking about specific things.
Yes, thank you for
There's the
mentioning
man.
that, Adam. Appreciate it. Our digital media coordinator.
There's the man. Save of the day.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
See ya.